good evening for those of you in Europe, a very good lunchtime for those of you in the Americas. I'm not sure if many of you are in Asia or Australia, in which case a very early morning to you as well. Welcome to this latest in our Snack and Learn webinars. My name is David Symons. I'm Director of Sustainability and also for those of you internally know, I lead our Future Ready program, and I'm really pleased to lead this session with you because, as you know, Future Ready is one of the key things that underpins WSP and all that we are doing. With Future Ready, we see the future more clearly, and then we take that out of an intellectual conversation and we advise and design to that today. And so that's something which at global level is really setting us apart. It's giving us enormous purpose as a business. And one of the elements of that is the very, very rapid advance of net zero commitments that governments are making at the moment. So ahead of COP26, the Global Climate Summit, we now have round about, I think it's 59 countries representing 54% of global greenhouse gas emissions have made a commitment that they will become what's called net zero economies, mainly by 2050. Some have gone a little bit faster than that. Sweden, I think, is saying 2040. Others are being a little bit later than that. China, for example, is committed to carbon neutral by 2060. But more and more countries are now committing to that. And when we talk about net zero, just for clarity, that is effectively meaning phasing out fossil fuel use across the economies. It is an enormous change, and it is mighty relevant for transport because in many countries, transport is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And I've just picked out two examples. The one that is closest to me, because I'm in London, is the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. And here, if you look at these various different trajectories, the UK has cut its greenhouse gas emissions by around about half since 1990. The main way, though, that has been done is by decarbonising the power sector. Tremendous progress that has been made there, and also through an element of, like all developed economies, deindustrialising since 1990. If you look at transport and surface transport, especially in the UK, is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and you will see from that blue line that those emissions have are virtually unchanged, just beginning to tend down now since 1990. And the factors associated with that is, of course, vehicles are getting more efficient from national and international regulation, but also just the reality that there are more people, there are more cars around, and so those two generally offset each other. Interestingly enough, it's not that we are traveling more. In Britain, we are traveling generally about 10% less than we were 20 or so years ago. And we're traveling for different reasons, even before COVID. We're traveling less to see friends and family. We're traveling less to shop. We're traveling more to go on holiday. And that's surface transport, that's not aviation. And then if you just look at, for example, if you go to the other end of the world, New Zealand, there you can see in New Zealand that for their greenhouse gas footprints for the country, you'll see that that heating and power is a big component, but transport around about 36% of national greenhouse gas emissions, and we will see that right across the world. That transport is a really big source of greenhouse gas emissions, and that comes from cars, it comes from trucks, and like I say, it can also come from shipping and aviation as well. So when we are working with transport authorities from national transport agencies, we're working with a number of those at the moment to shape strong net zero future ready strategies. and also we are working with a number of local authorities and local highways agencies on transport strategies as well. There are three areas that we are focusing on. So first of all, the lion's share of those emissions comes from actually those networks in use. So greenhouse gas emissions from burning the petrol and the diesel, or the gas, as others will call it, for in the cars that we are driving, in the trains that we have as well, and also potentially to an extent as well in generating the electricity that electric vehicles and electric trains run on as well. So that's in, if you look at most national inventories, that is the lion's share of it. But also a big area as well is construction and maintenance. So to make the steel, the concrete, the asphalt that is used in our transport networks, that uses large amounts of energy. Making steel, making cement emits carbon dioxide from the process as well. So it is much smaller than road and rail users, but for us as WSP, since often we are the designers of those schemes, that concrete and steel and asphalt are the tools of the trade, so to speak, that we use for those transport networks. Then how we specify those, and of course how those materials are then used by transport agencies is also really important. The third area, which I'm not going to have the time to talk about in detail, it's important from a reputational point of view, but is much smaller again from road rail users and construction and maintenance. It's just that transport agencies, local highways authorities, local transport organisations themselves, of course, have offices and things like lighting networks, and the miles travelled by rail maintenance crews that are working directly for the organisation, or by traffic officer fleets. That also has greenhouse gas emissions as well. But if I'm honest with you, it's smaller. It's still not insignificant. But what I really want to do in this in this talk is to talk about road and rail users and also construction and maintenance. And look, as I go through, I'll try and be as helpful as I can. Again, just a reminder, if you've got questions, feel free just to pop those questions in the chat function, and we can ask them and answer them as well. So let's talk then about user emissions. And here, just to give a little bit more granularity, again, from the UK, I know many of you are not in the UK, but here is just a snapshot of how greenhouse gas emissions by transport mode have changed over the last 18 or so years. And you will see that in the UK, at least, cars and taxis are the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. HGVs around about 17%, and interesting enough, rail is really a very small source of emissions. Just simply, again, because in the UK, I think 9 out of 10 passenger miles travelled in the UK are travelled by car. And so the important thing then that we then need to look at is if our countries are going to become net zero economies and are going to become fossil free, sometimes the temptation is to say you should just stop building roads, you should get everybody out walking and cycling, you should then invest enormously in rail. And you know what, I mean, all of those have some merit, but just the timescale that we have to do that means that even with a large investment like HS2, the high-speed rail network, that is a massive infrastructure project here in the UK, that will run a high-speed line from London through to Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester. Even with that investment, that will only take about between 1% and 3% of traffic off the strategic road network, so the freeway network. So if we're going to be a net zero economy, yes, we should talk about different modes and things such as that, but fundamentally, all modes have to go to zero carbon, and even with our Committee on Climate Change's forecast, yes, with active travel measures and the like, still the Committee on Climate Change will forecast that demand for road travel will increase over the coming 30 years. So all modes, especially roads, have to be at the heart of creating net zero transport strategies right across the world. So where are there places that we can look at? And typically we would say that there's, if we're talking about national transport strategies or even regional transport strategies where we've been developing those, we would say there's potentially there's 6 broad areas that can be looked at. So first of all, I talked about, what are the alternatives? Well, you know what I mean. A thing called modal shift is a great opportunity, especially in urban and suburban areas. So getting people out of petrol and diesel vehicles, getting them walking, cycling, or even saying, actually, do you need to travel as well? As COVID will have shown, actually, many of us are not traveling as much, and there's been a huge demand in growth, especially, for example, in cities like London, for cycling as well. So that's especially a case for cities and suburban areas. If you then come to more national priorities, then 2 areas to look at. First of all, decarbonising cars. So there's a legislation piece on that in terms of phase down. We will especially see that we'll see that from our Future Ready research, we'll see the price of electric vehicles coming down very, very fast indeed. And so we almost think that legislation becomes redundant in some respects. The challenge for local authorities and for national highways agencies is just having sufficient charging capacity, and that's multiple answers for that. That's trickle chargers potentially on street lamps. That will be ultra rapid chargers for gas stations to flip through. And if you're traveling longer distances as well, potentially making sure that we're giving people the confidence that if they turn up at a motorway or a freeway service station, that they'll be able to charge. Trucks is a much more nitty and knotty issue because we don't necessarily have an immediate trajectory for that. But Sweden is in the process now of trialing overhead catenary lines for trucks. Symons has installed some trial lanes on this in Germany as well. What we don't know is what is exactly going to be the approach. Is it going to be those overhead lines? Is it going to be what we might call those scale electric tracks for charging in the road? Those are 2 options, mighty expensive to install, and also a technological challenge as well to install. Or is there going to be progress on things like batteries, battery technology, so that they can become much more energy dense? That would certainly be a convenient system, but at the moment we are not there on battery technology, or possibly hydrogen being presented as a role as well. And again, some trials potentially starting in some parts of the world about running hydrogen trucks as well. So again, that's a really open area as well, and very relevant from our Future Ready thinking too. Coming to the bottom 6 areas, place-based solutions, really important. Again, just in terms of when we're planning new spaces and new areas, making sure that it is easy to walk and to cycle, and we're designing places that you don't have to have a car necessarily to be able to access and to use those. That's your 15-minute cities, or some research that our UK teams just published yesterday about a 30-minute rural community as well. So lots of opportunity there. And then thinking about this as economic growth. So our northeast of England, here in the UK, Nissan has just announced a massive gigafactory for battery technology up in the northeast. That's a tremendous economic fillip for the region. The northwest of England, the owner of Vauxhall cars up in Ellesmere Port has just announced an electric van plant there. This is going to be massive economic opportunity for regions and countries that get ahead of the game on this. And then lastly, there's global influence as well. So lots of opportunity there for things like aviation and shipping, where it is more global agreements and global arrangements, where maybe one country can't necessarily take the leadership. The important thing to note in all of this is that it doesn't all happen. If you've got a country, you're part of a country that has made a net zero commitment, what that doesn't mean is that it all happens in 2049. And so here is the recommendations that the UK Committee on Climate Change, that's an independent government advisor, has said this is the trajectory that the UK should be on in order to hit a net zero by 2050 timescale. And you can see that that timetable starts right now. So from 2030 in the UK, you won't be able to buy a new petrol or a diesel vehicle. But again, there is some transition there, so that there is a phase down of petrol and diesel vehicles. UK's government now thinking about just how would it do that. The same, some recommendations on trucks. So some recommendations that new diesel HGV buses and coach sales, where they're diesel powered, that should be phased down by 2040. The same for the rail network as well, that all diesel trains should be phased down and phased out by 2040. And then some recommendations that UK international aviation should be net zero by 2050. These are very, very ambitious timetables, and just shows from a future ready perspective, this means that the schemes we are working on need to be thinking and getting ready for this future right now. Otherwise, we're building an expensive retrofit that we need to make. So again, if I just give you an example in the UK, so these are the recommendations that the Committee on Climate Change has made. Very shortly, we're expecting government to be announcing a strategy called the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, and that will, we hope, bring these sorts of things to life and will set out that ambitious trajectory to 2030. The other area to focus on is also how do we deliver net zero and near zero for construction and maintenance. And if you just look at the challenge for this, this is quite a busy slide, but you can see that if you this is just a diagram of the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted for every ton of product produced. So cement, for example, it's a little bit more efficient now generally, but typically cement emits about 0.9 tons of CO2 for every ton that is produced. Steel produces about 2.6. But worth noting, of course, that steel is a lighter material than cement, so you don't maybe need quite so much of it. So construction and maintenance then is a big emitter, indirect emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we're developing and when we're working with some of these that are local and national highways authorities, then figuring out and developing a coherent strategy about how these organizations can be the anchor organizations to deliver near zero construction becomes really, really important. And so again, just referencing UK Committee on Climate Change, what that has effectively said is that if we're going to be a net zero economy by 2050, then UK construction has to effectively be fossil free by 2040. And that then means that steel has to be near zero by 2035, and that cement has to be effectively near zero by 2040. And that is by some sort of very big thinking and innovation by those plants, but also that becomes some big elements for us when we are designing schemes in WSP. Because the reality is, let me just spin this diagram through. The reality is that what we've learned from our future ready research is that construction companies generally, when they get WSP's designs, they don't have the bandwidth to second guess the designs that we are producing. So if we are specifying standard cement or traditional cement that we've done for the past years, the construction firms are not then going to be second guessing that and specifying low carbon, say GGBS cements and the like instead. So there is a lot of options on this. There's a framework called PAS 2080, which gives a really good hierarchy on that. And that goes right from the outset of, do you actually need this scheme or not? So we have a scheme that our highways teams have worked on recently, where that through some clever phasing, they managed to avoid knocking down and replacing 2 road bridges in a junction upgrade. Lower carbon, better for materials, lower cost, safer, and less disruptive for customers as well. But also there's lots of other areas as well that you can see here. There's innovations around lower temperature asphalts, different cements. Timber is quite widely used in Nordics, and for those of you in the States as well. So lots of areas of focus in terms of material innovation. And from steel, one of the areas that we're innovating and researching quite a bit on at the moment is the opportunity to asset tag beams and steel girders, so that at the end of their life they can then be reused as well. Lots and lots and lots to do on that. It's tremendously exciting for us as designers, as well as working with our clients on it. And then my last slide is really just a focus that when we are talking about net zero strategies at national, at local level, or indeed within WSP in Europe, the commitment that we've made to halve the carbon footprint of the designs and the advice that we give to our clients. Those strategies, we focus a lot on the what are we going to do, but as important also is to have a really, really clear program that covers the how are we actually going to do it, rather than having lots of effort to put in really great programs, but we don't have the enablers on this. And so areas that we would always be looking at, and which again we are working with some of our clients on there, include things like what are the governance and the tools that we need to be putting in place to deliver that. How are we going to be gathering data and reporting on that? What are the skills and the culture that we have from a people perspective? Partnerships, how do we work on this together? And then lastly, just the financials. So making sure that there is sufficient internal resource on that, but also that in business case planning and the like, that is developed in a sufficient way that it is really incentivizing and is focusing on net zero as an imperative, not just a focus traditionally for highways authorities, which particularly for engineering teams, that can sometimes be around cost and reliability. Super important. But now that near zero carbon imperative becomes as important. So, ladies and gents, that's my overview of this. So, in summary, decarbonising transport is a huge opportunity and indeed a challenge, because it is doing things really materially different, and that will be super relevant for our clients and highways clients. It is massively relevant for us as WSP, and you know what? It will also require some changes from people who use the networks that we are on. We don't have time to think about this. As you've seen in the timescales, fast action is really critical on this to avoid dangerous climate change. The what and the how are as important. And as I hope you will have seen from this presentation, if you're within the business, thank you for your future ready leadership. If you are a client outside of WSP, then just really to note that WSP is working really hard to address some of these. We've got a long way to go, but WSP, with our commitments and our future ready leadership, is absolutely at the heart of that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's everything that I wanted to take. Now, Sharon, that gives a chance and a few minutes to cover questions that we might have from the audience.
Thank you, David, for your presentation. So just before moving into the Q&A period, I would like to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform, and you can download the PDF version of the presentation from the handout box on the dashboard. I will start with the first question. How phasing of implementation of net zero transport strategy is being decided?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer in many cases depends on what your function as a highways authority is, and also your national legal legislation framework as well. I think the phasing probably starts with what can you get on with right away. That if I talk to some of our national highways agencies that we've been working with, electric vehicles is something that is happening very, very fast. So policies and programs that focus on that, but also getting ready for zero carbon trucks is a priority right now that we need to be getting on with as well, because yeah, that if we talk about phasing down new diesel sales by 2040, that time will come around very fast as well. So I think yeah, phasing is important, and I would say it's a focus on, yeah, what can you be getting on with right away? What do we need to be getting ready so that we actually hit that net zero trajectory and delivering that national target.
Thank you. Next question is, what software packages are we using to collate the baseline fuel and carbon data and also future net zero pathways?
I think there's a multiple number of tools. It's a good question, Charles. I think at national level, we will have that. There are national organisations that will gather transport data. So again, if you don't mind me just talking very briefly from a UK perspective, Department for Transport has a national transport model. That is the model that we have been using to model road user emissions, where we've been working on net zero strategies for road users. Where we then bring that to the maintenance and the construction elements, where we're measuring the carbon footprint of the schemes that we are working on. Again, there are proprietary tools that we are using for that. I think the piece that I'm particularly interested in is at the moment we are partnering with organisations like Autodesk to integrate carbon modelling into the Civils 3D packages and the like as well. So for those of you in WSP, that's a piece of work that our transport teams are working on, which hopefully just means that when we are designing projects, we get whole life carbon footprints at a click, rather than having to take it out to another package and bring it back again.
Thank you. Next question is, while phasing down on fossil fuels vehicles, what are the mitigation measures proposed to reduce impact on commuters?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I suppose, yeah, I mean, it is important to think about that sort of in the round. I think it's probably quite a local answer, because I think from our experiences, when you get to moving to electric vehicles, at the moment electric vehicles are more expensive, but we will see that coming down very fast. And so all of the models that we will see is that electric motoring is much cheaper than fossil fuel motoring. So I think once you get over the transition, then actually it's it raises all boats and provides a cheaper alternative than the petrol and diesel vehicle. The challenge we will then see, though, is that then, because it's cheaper, we will get much higher demand for electric vehicle, and people will travel further, and potentially that leads to more congestion. So I think that's probably some of the areas that I'm not sure any transport authority has really wrestled with, in terms of, is that then the answer, that we end up building more roads, or actually then do we need to be thinking more imaginatively about some different road pricing mechanisms and things such as that? But there's some brave conversations that few governments have been able to take yet.
Thank you. We have time for the last question. While developing project development schemes, does low carbon footprint solutions going to be to get better weightage in awarding tenders?
That's a great question, and probably, I think I would love the answer to be yes. I think it has to be, doesn't it? I think there's two options or two ways of answering it. I think is so first of all, when we are developing schemes, we will go through an options appraisal generally. I think there is a role to be thinking very much about at national level or regional level. How does carbon how is carbon considered in the weighting for that? Generally, it's even when you monetize it, the carbon price is not big enough at the moment. And then when you come to looking at the scheme itself, I think what our research has shown that actually for about 30 or 40% of the carbon footprint, that is a no regret solution. If you design more efficiently, you'll lower carbon and lower cost as well. That from our infrastructure experience gets us to about 30 to 40% of the reduction. After that, then absolutely, then there is a commercial element to that, because quite simply, yeah, in some circumstances, it is not the cheapest solution. The answer to that is either that can be highways authorities can then weight tenders in different ways, or for some of the other clients, large national clients that we're working with, they are providing some quite long-term signalling to their construction suppliers to say, hey, look, this is where we want to be. We want you to really innovate in that, and we as the Highways Authority do not want to be paying for that innovation. So get on the bus and start investing. Let's see. There's a lot of further work to be done on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. So we're at the end of our webinar session. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. And thank you, David, for a fantastic presentation. Feel free to follow up with David for any additional questions. And have a good day, everyone.
Very good. Thank you all for joining. Pleasure. Bye.